The thunder of hooves echoed across the Montana prairie as Katherine Hayes raced toward the shelter of her family's barn, her heart pounding as fiercely as her horse's galloping stride. 3 men pursued her outlaws, who had been terrorizing the region for weeks, and they were closing in fast. The year was 1878, and in this untamed corner of the frontier, the law was often too distant to protect those who needed it most. Catherine's chestnut mare was tiring, foam flecking its mouth as they crested the final hill toward the Hayes homestead. Her father and brothers had ridden to town that morning, leaving her alone to tend to the farm. She had never imagined that the notorious Reeves Gang would choose today to make their appearance on her family's land. "You can't outrun us forever, girl," shouted the leader, a man with a scar slicing through his left eyebrow. His laughter cut through the wind as Catherine's eyes darted frantically toward the safety of home, now within sight. She reached the barn first, leaping from her horse and slapping its flank to send it running before ducking inside the large wooden structure. Her trembling hands fumbled with the heavy bar that would secure the door, but before she could slide it into place, a boot kicked it open, sending her stumbling backward. "Thought you'd give us the slip, did you?" The scarred man grinned, flanked by his 2 companions as they entered the barn. "Now, we've heard tell that your daddy's been keeping his money somewhere special. You're going to show us where." Katherine backed away, her blue eyes darting around for anything she might use as a weapon. The pitchfork was too far, the shovel out of reach. "My father doesn't keep money here," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Don't lie to us, girl," growled the second man, a heavy-set brute with a filthy beard. "Everyone knows Joseph Hayes sold half his cattle last month and hasn't deposited the money in the bank." The third outlaw, thin and nervous-looking, peered out the small barn window. "We got company, Silas. Rider coming fast." The leader, Silas, cursed. "Keep an eye on her. Don't let her move." Katherine felt a surge of hope. Perhaps one of her brothers had returned early, or a neighbor passing by, anyone who might help her escape these men. The sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped abruptly. Katherine could hear the newcomer dismounting outside, boots crunching on gravel. "Whoever you are," Silas called out, drawing his pistol, "this ain't your business. Ride on, unless you're looking to die today." The only response was silence, followed by deliberate footsteps approaching the barn door. Katherine held her breath as tension filled the air like smoke. Suddenly, the door exploded inward with tremendous force, nearly torn from its hinges. Framed in the doorway stood a tall figure, revolver already raised. The blast of the first shot was deafening in the enclosed space of the barn. Silas howled as the bullet struck his gun hand, his weapon clattering to the straw-covered floor. "The next one won't be so merciful," said the newcomer, his voice deep and steady as he stepped into the light. "Now, back away from the lady." Katherine stared at her rescuer. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair beneath a dust-covered hat and eyes the color of a summer storm. A stranger, yet somehow, in that moment, the most welcome sight she had ever seen. "This ain't your fight, mister," Silas snarled, clutching his bleeding hand. "You made it my fight when you chased this woman onto her own property," the stranger replied, his gun unwavering. "I'm giving you one chance to leave. I suggest you take it." The bearded outlaw lunged for his gun, but the stranger was faster. His second shot hit the floor near the man's feet, stopping him cold. "Next one won't miss," he warned, his gaze steel. The third outlaw, the nervous one, raised his hands. "We're leaving, mister. Come on, Silas. This ain't worth dying over." After a tense moment, Silas nodded, his face twisted with rage and pain. "This ain't over," he promised, glaring at Katherine before backing toward the door. The stranger kept his gun trained on them until they mounted their horses and rode away. Then he turned to Katherine. "Are you hurt, miss?" She shook her head, suddenly aware that her legs were trembling so badly she might collapse. "No, thank you. You saved my life. My name is Katherine Hayes." He holstered his weapon and removed his hat, revealing the full extent of his handsome features. "Preston York," he replied with a slight nod. "And I'm afraid those men might return. Is there anyone else here with you?" "No," she admitted. "My father and brothers rode to town this morning. They won't be back until tomorrow." Preston frowned, his eyes scanning the horizon through the open barn door. "Then, Miss Hayes, If you'll permit me, I believe I should stay until your family returns. Those weren't men who take kindly to being bested. Katherine should have hesitated at the thought of allowing a stranger to remain on their property overnight, but the memory of the outlaws' faces was still too fresh, too frightening. And there was something about Preston York, a steadiness, a quiet strength that made her trust him instinctively. "I would be grateful for your protection, Mr. York," she said, finally finding her voice again. "Please, come to the house. The least I can offer you is a hot meal after what you've done." As they walked from the barn to the modest but well-kept farmhouse, Katherine felt the weight of his gaze on her. "If you don't mind my asking, Miss Hayes, what brought those men here? They seem to be looking for something specific." Katherine sighed, pushing a strand of auburn hair from her face. "My father sold a large portion of our cattle last month. The money was meant for expanding our property, buying the Wilson land that borders ours to the east. But he didn't trust the bank after the robbery in April, so he's been keeping it here." She hesitated. "I shouldn't be telling you this." Preston's expression remained impassive. "Your secret's safe with me." But it explains why they were so determined. Inside the house, Katherine busied herself with preparing a meal while Preston checked the windows and doors, ensuring everything was secure. When he returned to the kitchen, she had a pot of stew warming on the stove. "You're not from around here, are you, Mr. York?" she asked as she set the table for two. "No, madam. I've been working my way north from Texas. Was a foreman on a ranch near Austin for several years. And now?" His eyes met hers, something guarded in their depths. "Now I'm looking for a fresh start. Heard there might be work in these parts." Katherine nodded, not pressing further despite her curiosity. There was clearly more to Preston York's story than he was sharing, but he had earned the right to his privacy. As they ate, Katherine found herself studying him when he wasn't looking. His hands were strong but careful, his manners impeccable despite his travel-worn appearance. He spoke little of himself, but asked thoughtful questions about her family's ranch and listened attentively to her answers. "My father started with nothing," she explained. "Built everything you see here with his own 2 hands after my mother died. I was just 10 then, and my brothers were younger still." "He raised you well," Preston observed. "Not many women would have kept their wits about them the way you did today." Katherine smiled faintly. "When you grow up on a ranch with 2 brothers and no mother, you learn to be resilient. Father never treated me differently because I was a girl, said I needed to be able to handle whatever life threw at me." As evening fell, Preston insisted on taking the first watch while Katherine rested. "I'll wake you in a few hours," he promised, checking his revolver one last time before settling into a chair by the window, his eyes fixed on the darkening landscape. Katherine wanted to argue but found herself exhausted from the day's events. She retired to her bedroom but left the door ajar, comforted by the knowledge that Preston York was standing guard just beyond. In the middle of the night, she awoke to find him gently shaking her shoulder. "Miss Hayes," he whispered, "I saw movement near the barn. Stay here while I check it out." Before she could respond, he was gone, moving silently through the house. Katherine waited, tense and afraid, until she heard the distant sound of a gunshot. Unable to remain still any longer, she grabbed her father's old shotgun from beneath her bed and hurried after Preston. The moon was high and bright, illuminating the yard between the house and barn. She caught sight of Preston kneeling beside a prone figure on the ground. "Mr. York!" she called, rushing toward him, shotgun ready. He turned at the sound of her voice. "I told you to stay inside," he said, though his tone held more concern than anger. "It's the nervous one from earlier. Must have come back alone, thinking he could finish what they started." The outlaw was clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. He looked up at Katherine with hatred in his eyes. "Silas will kill you for this," he spat. "He knows about the money, won't stop till he gets it." Preston hauled the man to his feet. "We need to secure him somewhere until your father returns. Then we can get him to the proper authorities." They locked the wounded outlaw in the cellar after Katherine bandaged his shoulder. The night passed without further incident, but dawn brought no relief from tension. Preston stood on the porch, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. "They'll be back," he said as Katherine joined him, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Probably with more men." She handed him a steaming cup. "My father and brothers should return by noon. Perhaps we should ride out to meet them." Preston shook his head. Too risky. We'd be exposed on the open road. Better to stay here where we have shelter and defensible positions. He took a sip of coffee, his eyes never leaving the distant hills. Is there somewhere safer we could move the money? Somewhere they wouldn't think to look? Katherine considered this. There's a loose floorboard in the smokehouse. Father sometimes hides small valuables there. Show me, Preston said. They moved the money, nearly $2,000 in various denominations, to the new hiding place, working quickly and glancing frequently at the horizon. When they returned to the house, Preston began methodically checking and loading every firearm in the Hayes household. "Can you shoot, Miss Hayes?" he asked, offering her a revolver. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. Father made sure we all could. She took the gun, checking it with practiced ease that seemed to impress him. "Good, because if they come in force, I'll need your help." Katherine met his gaze steadily. "You'll have it." As the morning wore on, they prepared as best they could. Preston moved furniture to create barricades at the windows, filled buckets with water in case of fire, and positioned weapons at strategic points throughout the house. "Why are you doing all this for us, Mr. York?" Katherine asked as they worked. "You don't know my family. You could have ridden away after seeing those men off yesterday." Preston paused, a shadow crossing his features. "I've seen what men like that can do when left unchecked. 2 years ago, a gang similar to this one raided a homestead near where I worked in Texas. The family had refused to sell their land to a cattle baron who'd hired these men to intimidate them." His voice grew tight. "I was too late to help them. I won't be too late again." The raw pain in his voice told Katherine there was more to the story than he was sharing, but she didn't press. Instead, she placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Well, I'm grateful you happened along when you did, Mr. York." His eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. For a moment, Katherine forgot about the danger, aware only of the warmth of his arm beneath her palm and the intensity of his gaze. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching horses, many of them. Preston was at the window in an instant. "At least 6 riders," he reported grimly. "Silas is with them?" He turned to Katherine. "Get to the back room. Use the shotgun if anyone tries to come through that window." "I'm staying with you," she insisted. "Katherine," he said, using her first name for the first time, his voice softening. "Please." Something in his tone made her nod reluctantly. She positioned herself as he'd asked, but kept the door open so she could hear what transpired. The riders stopped in the yard. Silas's voice carried clearly through the morning air. "York, I know you're in there. Send out the Hayes girl and the money, and maybe we'll let you ride away from this." Preston stood just inside the front door, his stance relaxed but alert. "You're not getting the girl or the money, Silas, but I'm offering you the same deal as yesterday right away now, and you get to keep breathing." Raucous laughter answered him. "1 man against 7? Those odds don't favor you, York." "Maybe not," Preston conceded, "but I guarantee I'll take several of you with me. Who wants to be first?" The standoff continued for several tense minutes. Katherine could hear the outlaws conferring in low voices, apparently debating their next move. Then Silas spoke again. "We're coming in, York. Last chance to be reasonable." "I'm being perfectly reasonable," Preston replied calmly. "You're the ones about to make a fatal mistake." The first shot came through the window to Preston's left. He ducked, returning fire with deadly accuracy. A cry of pain from outside told Katherine his bullet had found its mark. What followed was chaos. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions as the outlaws spread out to surround the house. Preston moved from window to window, firing methodically, forcing the attackers to keep their distance. Katherine remained at her post, heart racing, until she heard glass breaking at the kitchen window. Peering carefully around the doorframe, she saw a man climbing through. Without hesitation, she raised the shotgun and fired. The blast caught the outlaw in the chest, throwing him backward through the window he'd just entered. The recoil knocked Katherine off balance, but she steadied herself, shocked at what she'd done, yet knowing she had no choice. "Katherine!" Preston called, concern evident in his voice. "I'm all right," she answered, reloading with shaking hands. The attack continued relentlessly. Preston had accounted for at least 2 of the outlaws, and Katherine's shotgun had eliminated a third, but the remaining 4, including Silas, kept up a steady barrage of gunfire that pinned them down. We're running low on ammunition, Preston said grimly as he joined her briefly in the back room. His left arm was bleeding from a graze, but he seemed not to notice. They know it too. They'll rush us soon. Katherine tore a strip from her petticoat and quickly bandaged his arm. What do we do? Preston checked his revolver, only 2 bullets left. We need to get to the barn. There's more space to maneuver, and we might be able to use the horses to break away if necessary. But how do we get there? It's 50 yards of open ground. Preston's eyes met hers, and in them, she saw not fear, but determination. I'll create a diversion. When I give the signal, run for the barn as fast as you can. Don't look back. Don't stop for anything. I'm not leaving you, Katherine protested. I'll be right behind you, he promised, but one of us needs to make it. He hesitated, then added, if I don't make it, there's a marshal in Helena named Dawson. Get word to him about Silas and his gang. He'll know what to do. Before Katherine could argue further, Preston moved to the front of the house. She heard him call out to Silas. Looks like you've got me cornered, Reeves. I'm coming out to talk terms. There was a moment of silence, then Silas's suspicious reply. Throw out your gun first. Preston caught Katherine's eye and nodded toward the back door. She understood this was their chance. He threw his empty revolver out the front door, keeping his loaded one concealed. I'm coming out with my hands up, he shouted. Just want to talk. As Preston stepped onto the front porch, hands raised, all attention focused on him. Katherine slipped out the back door and ran for the barn, her heart pounding in her ears. Behind her, she heard Preston shout something, followed by more gunfire. She reached the barn and ducked inside, frantically searching for a weapon. Finding a rifle on the wall, she checked it loaded, thankfully, and peered out through a crack in the door. Preston was in trouble. He had managed to shoot one more outlaw, but was now pinned down behind the water trough, bullets splintering the wood around him. Silas and his 2 remaining men were closing in. Without thinking, Katherine raised the rifle and took careful aim. The first shot caught one of the outlaws in the leg, sending him sprawling. The second missed, but caused enough confusion for Preston to break cover and run toward the barn. Bullets kicked up dust at his heels as he sprinted across the open ground. Katherine provided covering fire, forcing Silas and his remaining man to take cover. When Preston was just yards from the barn, Silas emerged from behind a wagon and took deliberate aim. Katherine's blood ran cold. Preston, down! She screamed. Preston dropped instantly as Katherine fired. Her bullet struck Silas in the shoulder, spinning him around, but not taking him out of the fight. Preston scrambled the remaining distance to the barn, and Katherine pulled him inside, slamming the heavy door shut. That was too close, he gasped, breathing heavily. You're bleeding, she said, noticing a fresh wound on his side. Just a graze, he insisted, though his face was pale beneath his tan. We need to barricade the door. They worked quickly, piling hay bales and equipment against the barn doors. Outside, they could hear Silas shouting orders to his remaining man. They're going to try to burn us out, Preston said grimly, peering through a gap in the barn wall. It's what I'd do in their position. Katherine's mind raced. There's a trapdoor in the loft that leads to the roof. Father built it for repairing shingles. We might be able to use it to gain a better position. Preston nodded approvingly. Show me. They climbed to the loft, careful to stay away from the windows where they might be seen. The trapdoor was small but large enough for them to slip through one at a time. Preston insisted on going first, checking that it was safe before helping Katherine up. From the roof, they had a commanding view of the yard. Silas was indeed preparing torches, his face twisted with rage and pain from his wound. His remaining companion looked nervous, clearly having second thoughts about their situation. One shot left in this rifle, Katherine whispered. Make it count. Preston took the rifle, sighting carefully. If I can take out Silas, the other might run. He drew a deep breath, steadying himself, then squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the yard. Silas jerked backward, dropping the torch as the bullet struck him in the chest. He staggered a few steps, then collapsed. His companion took one look at his fallen leader and fled, mounting his horse and galloping away without a backward glance. The sudden silence was deafening. Katherine felt her legs give way as the tension drained from her body. Preston caught her before she could fall, his strong arms encircling her waist. It's over, he said softly. You're safe now? She looked up at him, seeing the same relief in his eyes that she felt coursing through her. Without thinking, she reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "We're safe," she corrected him. "Because of you." Something changed in his expression, then a softening, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. His hand covered hers, pressing it more firmly against his cheek. For a heartbeat, Katherine thought he might kiss her, and was startled by how much she wanted him to. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching riders. They both tensed, reaching for weapons they no longer had, until Katherine recognized the figures on horseback. "It's father!" she exclaimed, relief flooding through her. "And my brothers!" They climbed down from the roof as Joseph Hayes and his sons, Patrick and Kenneth, rode into the yard, their expressions changing from confusion to alarm as they took in the bodies scattered across their property. Katherine ran to her father, throwing her arms around him as he dismounted. "Thank God you're home," she said, her voice breaking. Joseph Hayes held his daughter tight, his weathered face pale with concern. "What in heaven's name happened here, Katherine?" Before she could answer, Preston approached, his hat in his hands. "Sir, my name is Preston York. I happened to be passing by yesterday when these men were threatening your daughter. They returned this morning with reinforcements." Joseph took in Preston's bloodied appearance and the evident signs of the fierce battle that had taken place. "You fought them off? Alone?" "Not alone, sir," Preston replied, his eyes meeting Katherine's. "Your daughter is quite remarkable." Katherine felt herself blush under his gaze, but her father's proud smile warmed her heart. "That she is, Mr. York. That she is." Joseph extended his hand. "It seems my family and I owe you a tremendous debt of gratitude." Preston shook the offered hand. "Any man would have done the same, Mr. Hayes." "Perhaps," Joseph said skeptically, "but not many would have succeeded." He turned to his sons. "Patrick, Kenneth, see to these bodies. We'll need to notify the sheriff in town." To Katherine and Preston, he added, "Let's get you both inside and tended to properly. Then I want to hear the full story." As they walked toward the house, Joseph kept a protective arm around his daughter, but Katherine found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Preston, who walked a few paces behind them. When their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, a connection forged in danger that neither could deny. Over the next few days, as Preston recovered from his wounds at the Hayes homestead, that connection deepened. The sheriff came and went, taking statements and the surviving outlaw into custody. The bodies were properly dealt with, and life began to return to normal, except nothing felt normal to Katherine anymore. Her world had shifted on its axis the moment Preston York had kicked in that barn door and fired his first shot. She found reasons to spend time with him, changing his bandages, bringing him meals, sitting with him on the porch in the evenings as he regained his strength. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, her dreams for the ranch, his experiences in Texas, books they had read, places they hoped to see someday. Joseph Hayes watched these developments with a knowing eye but said nothing, observing the way his daughter blossomed in Preston's company. His sons were less subtle, teasing Katherine mercilessly until she threatened to put salt in their coffee. On the 5th day after the attack, Preston announced at breakfast that he would be leaving the following morning. "My wounds are healed enough for travel," he said, not meeting Katherine's eyes, "and I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "Nonsense," Joseph replied. "You're welcome to stay as long as you wish, York. In fact," he continued thoughtfully, "I find myself in need of a new foreman. My previous man left to start his own spread last month. The position comes with fair pay and a cabin of your own on the property." The offer hung in the air between them. Katherine held her breath, hoping against hope that Preston would accept. "That's very generous, Mr. Hayes," Preston said slowly. "But I wouldn't want you to feel obligated because of what happened." Joseph waved this away. "This has nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with recognizing a good man when I see one. You know cattle, you can handle men, and you've proven your character beyond any doubt. The job is yours if you want it." Preston's eyes finally met Katherine's across the table. Whatever he saw there seemed to make up his mind. "In that case, sir, I accept with gratitude." The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Katherine's life. Preston proved to be an exceptional foreman, earning the respect of the ranch hands and implementing changes that improved efficiency and productivity. Joseph increasingly relied on his judgment, and even Catherine's brothers came to regard him as something between an older brother and a second father. For Catherine, each day brought new discoveries about the man who had saved her life. She learned that he could play the harmonica with surprising skill, that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was most relaxed, that he treated even the youngest and most inexperienced ranch hand with patience and respect. But she also sensed a lingering sadness in him, a shadow that fell over his features when he thought no one was watching. Whatever had happened in Texas still haunted him, though he never spoke of it directly. Summer turned to autumn, and with the changing leaves came a change in their relationship as well. What had begun as gratitude had become friendship, and now was unmistakably blossoming into something more. Their hands would brush when passing tools, lingering a moment too long to be accidental. Their eyes would meet across the dinner table, conveying thoughts too intimate for words. One evening in late September, Catherine found Preston sitting alone on the porch of his cabin, staring at the stars. Without a word, she sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You're thinking about Texas again," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Preston was silent for so long, she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "The family I told you about, the ones killed by the raiders, there was a woman among them. Her name was Emily. We were to be married." Catherine's heart constricted. "Preston, I'm so sorry. I was in town when it happened," he continued, the words coming faster now, as if a dam had broken. "Getting supplies for our wedding. When I returned, the house was burning. I tried to save them, but—" His voice broke. "I was too late. The raiders were gone, but they'd left their mark." Catherine took his hand in hers, offering silent support as he struggled to continue. "I spent the next year tracking them down, one by one. Not proud of it, but I couldn't let them live after what they'd done." He turned to look at her, his eyes haunted. "That's the kind of man I am, Catherine. I've taken lives in vengeance. I understand if that changes how you see me." Instead of pulling away as he clearly expected, Catherine moved closer. "What I see is a man who has suffered greatly but still found the strength to save others. A man of honor and courage." She reached up to touch his face, turning it toward hers. "A man I've come to care for deeply." The vulnerability in his eyes nearly broke her heart. "Catherine," he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, tentative, as if he feared she might vanish like a dream. But as she responded, the kiss deepened, becoming a testament to everything they had survived together, and all they might yet become to each other. When they finally parted, breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he confessed. "After Emily, I closed that part of myself off. Didn't think I deserved happiness after failing her so completely." "You didn't fail her," Catherine said firmly, "and she wouldn't want you to punish yourself forever." "I know that now," he replied, his arms tightening around her. "Because of you." The next morning, Catherine found her father alone in the barn, repairing a bridle with his usual meticulous care. She hesitated in the doorway, suddenly nervous about what she had come to say. Joseph looked up, smiling at the sight of his daughter. "Something on your mind, Katie?" She took a deep breath. "Father, I need to tell you something about Preston and me." Joseph's eyes twinkled. "If it's that you're sweet on each other, I believe everyone from here to Helena already knows that, daughter." Catherine flushed. "Is it that obvious?" "To anyone with eyes," her father confirmed, setting aside his work. "And I must say, it's about time you found someone worthy of you. That young man has proven himself in ways few others could." Relief washed over her. "Then you approve?" "I do," Joseph said, his expression growing serious. "Your mother would have liked him too, I think. He has the same quiet strength she admired in people." He studied his daughter's face. "Has he spoken to you of his feelings?" "Yes," Catherine admitted, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. "Last night." Joseph nodded thoughtfully. "I suspected as much when I saw him heading toward the creek at dawn with that determined look on his face." At Catherine's confused expression, he explained, He's been collecting stones, very particular about their shape and color from what I observed. Stones? Catherine repeated, puzzled. Joseph chuckled. When I courted your mother, I spent weeks searching for the perfect stone to have set in her engagement ring. Couldn't afford a proper diamond in those days. His eyes grew distant with memory. She always said she preferred that river stone to any diamond anyway. Catherine's heart skipped a beat. You think he's making a ring? I think, her father said gently, that you should prepare yourself for a very important question, daughter. The question came the very evening. As the sun was setting over the Montana hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Preston had asked Catherine to ride with him to the creek that marked the eastern boundary of the Hayes property, a spot they had visited often during the summer. When they arrived, Catherine gasped. Preston had prepared a small clearing beside the water, with a blanket spread on the ground, and wildflowers arranged in a circle around it. A simple picnic awaited them, bread, cheese, and apples from the Hayes orchard. Preston, this is beautiful, she breathed, allowing him to help her dismount. His smile was tender as he led her to the blanket. I wanted this moment to be special. They ate together as the sun sank lower, talking and laughing as they always did. But Catherine sensed a nervous energy in Preston that hadn't been there before, a certain tension in his movements. Finally, as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Preston took her hands in his. Catherine, when I rode onto your land that day, I was a man without direction, running from my past, afraid to hope for a future. His voice grew husky with emotion. But you changed everything. You showed me that, even after the darkest night, dawn comes again. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that gleamed in the fading light. It was a ring, just as her father had suspected, a band of silver with a smooth, flat stone of deepest blue set within it. The silver was once a Spanish coin, Preston explained, his voice trembling slightly. And the stone comes from this very creek. I chose it because it's the exact color of your eyes when you're happy. Catherine felt tears welling up, but they were tears of joy. Katherine Hayes, Preston continued, I know I'm not a wealthy man. All I can offer you is my heart, my hands, and my solemn promise to cherish you all the days of my life. He took a deep breath. Will you marry me? Yes, Catherine whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, Preston York, I will marry you. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, fitting perfectly as if it had always been meant to be there, Catherine knew with absolute certainty that this was where her life had been leading all along, to this man, this moment, this promise of a future built together. They were married on a crisp October morning, with golden leaves drifting down around them as they spoke their vows beneath the old oak tree in the Hayes yard. Catherine wore her mother's dress, lovingly altered by Mrs. Wilson from the neighboring farm. Preston stood tall and proud in a new suit, his eyes never leaving Catherine's face as she walked toward him on her father's arm. The entire community turned out for the celebration that followed. The Reeves Gang had terrorized many in the area, and word of how Preston and Catherine had stood against them had spread far and wide. They were something of local heroes now, though both dismissed such talk with embarrassment. As evening fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Preston led his bride in their first dance as husband and wife. The fiddler played a slow, sweet melody that seemed to capture everything they felt for each other. Happy, Mrs. York? Preston murmured against her ear as they swayed together. Completely, Catherine replied, nestling closer in his arms. Though, I must admit, it's strange to have a new name after 22 years. You wear it well, he assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple, and I intend to make sure you never regret taking it. The next morning, they set out for their new home, the foreman's cabin that Preston had spent weeks expanding and improving. Though just a quarter-mile from the main house, it offered the privacy they craved as newlyweds while keeping them close to the family and work they both loved. Preston carried Catherine across the threshold, setting her down gently in the main room that now boasted new curtains she had sewn herself, and furniture her brothers had helped Preston build. Welcome home, Catherine, he said softly, his eyes shining with love and pride. She reached up to touch his face, still sometimes amazed that this remarkable man was now her husband. Our home, she corrected him with a smile. Their life together settled into a rhythm of work and love, challenges and triumphs. The Hayes Ranch flourished under the combined efforts of Joseph, his sons, and Preston, whose innovative ideas expanded their operations beyond cattle to include horses, and even a small apple orchard. Katherine divided her time between helping her father with the ranch accounts and creating a home with Preston. She discovered to her delight that her husband was an eager student in the kitchen, insisting on learning to cook alongside her so she wouldn't bear that burden alone. "My mother raised me to believe that a man should know how to care for himself and those he loves," he explained one evening as they worked side by side preparing supper. "Said a man who can't feed himself isn't much of a man at all." Katherine smiled, flour dusting her cheeks as she kneaded bread dough. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman. I wish I could have met her." A shadow passed over Preston's face. "She died when I was 15. Fever took her before the doctor could even reach our homestead." He paused in slicing potatoes, his eyes distant. "Father followed 3 years later. Heart just gave out one morning." Katherine wiped her hands and moved to embrace him from behind, resting her cheek against his broad back. "So, you've been alone since you were 18? He covered her hands with his own, where they rested on his chest. "Until now." Winter came early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow by mid-November. The days grew shorter, the nights longer, giving Preston and Katherine precious hours by the fire in their snug cabin. They would read to each other, play cards, or simply talk, discovering new layers to each other with every passing day. On Christmas morning, Katherine awoke to find Preston's side of the bed empty. She found him in the main room, stoking the fire with a thoughtful expression on his face. "Merry Christmas, husband," she said, wrapping her shawl more tightly around her shoulders against the morning chill. He turned, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Merry Christmas, wife." He crossed to her, gathering her in his arms for a lingering kiss. "I have something for you." From behind a chair, he produced a carefully wrapped package. Katherine opened it to find a beautiful leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with intricate designs of wildflowers. "I noticed you writing on scraps of paper sometimes," Preston explained. "Thought you might like something proper to keep your thoughts in." Katherine traced the designs with her finger, deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. "It's perfect, thank you." She hesitated, then added, "I have something for you too, but it's not something I could wrap." Preston's eyebrows rose in curiosity. "Oh?" Katherine took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach, her eyes never leaving his. "We're going to have a baby, Preston. Come summer, there will be 3 of us." The wonder that spread across his face was something Katherine knew she would remember all her days. "A baby?" he whispered, as if afraid speaking too loudly might make the news untrue. "We're having a baby." She nodded, tears of happiness welling in her eyes. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday when I went to town with Father." Preston fell to his knees before her, pressing his cheek against her still flat abdomen. "Hello in there," he said softly. "I'm your pa." His voice broke on the last word, and when he looked up at Katherine, there were tears in his eyes as well. "I never thought, after everything, that I would be blessed with this." She ran her fingers through his dark hair, her heart so full it seemed it might burst. "We've both been given a second chance at happiness, Preston, and we deserve it." News of the coming baby spread quickly through the family and brought great joy, especially to Joseph Hayes, who declared himself ready to be the most devoted grandfather in Montana territory. Katherine's brothers immediately began planning a cradle, arguing good-naturedly about its design. As winter gave way to spring, Katherine's body changed with the seasons. Preston watched these changes with awe and tenderness, his protective instincts heightened. He insisted on taking over more of her chores, despite her protests that pregnancy wasn't an illness. "Humor me," he would say, kissing her forehead. "It brings me joy to care for you both." How could she argue with that? So, she allowed him his small victories, secretly touched by his devotion. In turn, she made sure he knew how much she appreciated his efforts, finding ways to show her love, even on days when her growing belly made her uncomfortable or tired. The baby quickened in April, and the first time Preston felt the child move beneath his hand, he wore an expression of such stunned amazement that Katherine laughed out loud. "That's our child," he said in wonder. "Actually kicking? With the strength of his father, Katherine teased, wincing slightly as the baby delivered a particularly enthusiastic kick. Or her mother, Preston countered with a grin. They had agreed not to express a preference for a son or daughter, both insisting that a healthy child was all they wanted. May brought unusually heavy rains that swelled the creek beyond its banks, threatening the lower pastures. The entire ranch worked day and night to move cattle to higher ground and shore up vulnerable areas. Despite Katherine's condition, she insisted on helping, keeping the men fed and organizing supplies. It was during this crisis that the ranch received unexpected visitors. Katherine was in the kitchen of the main house, preparing a large pot of stew for the returning ranch hands, when her father entered with two strangers, a man and woman, both travel-worn and weary. "Katherine," Joseph said, "these folks are looking for Preston. This is Mr. and Mrs. Calloway from Texas." Katherine wiped her hands on her apron, instinctively resting one protectively over her rounded belly as she studied the visitors. The man was tall and gray-haired, with a stern face softened by kind eyes. The woman was smaller, delicate-featured, but with a resilient air about her. "I'm Katherine York," she said, extending her hand. "Preston's wife." Something like relief flickered across Mrs. Calloway's face. "He married," she said softly. "Thank God." Before Katherine could question this curious response, the door opened again and Preston entered, soaked from the rain and mud-spattered. He stopped short at the sight of the visitors, his face draining of color. "Martha? Thomas?" he whispered as if seeing ghosts. "How?" Mrs. Calloway moved toward him, her hands outstretched. "Preston, my boy. We've been searching for so long." Preston seemed frozen in place, his eyes wide with shock. "Emily's parents," he explained to Katherine, his voice hollow. "But I don't understand. How did you find me?" "We never stopped looking," Thomas Calloway said gruffly. "A man matching your description was seen in Helena last month. We took a chance." Martha Calloway reached Preston and took his hands in hers. "We don't blame you, Preston. We never did. Emily's death wasn't your fault." At these words, something seemed to break in Preston. A shudder ran through his powerful frame, and Katherine moved instinctively to his side, supporting him as Martha continued. "We've come to bring you home, but I see you've made a new life here." Her eyes took in Katherine's pregnant form, and her expression softened further. "A good life, it appears." Joseph quietly excused himself, giving the four of them privacy. When he had gone, Preston found his voice again. "I failed her," he said rawly. "Failed all of you. I couldn't protect her." Thomas shook his head firmly. "No man could have stood against so many alone. You nearly died trying." He placed a heavy hand on Preston's shoulder. "We lost our daughter, but we didn't want to lose you too. You were already a son to us." "We needed time to grieve," Martha added. "By the time we went looking for you, you had disappeared." Katherine watched the emotions play across her husband's face. Guilt, grief, disbelief, and finally, a cautious hope. She squeezed his hand reassuringly, and he seemed to draw strength from her presence. "I hunted them down," he admitted, looking directly at Thomas. "Every last one. I know that doesn't bring Emily back, but—" "We know," Thomas interrupted. "Word reached us. Can't say I'm sorry about it either." His weathered face hardened momentarily, then relaxed. "But that's the past. We're here now to make peace with what happened, to reconnect with the man our daughter loved." Preston's grip on Katherine's hand tightened. "I've found love again," he said, his voice growing stronger. "Katherine saved me in more ways than I can explain. We're starting a family." He looked at his wife with such tenderness that her heart swelled. "But having you in our lives would be a blessing I never dared hope for." Martha embraced him then. And after a moment's hesitation, Thomas did the same. Katherine wiped away tears as she watched the healing begin before her eyes, a healing that had been years in the making. The Calloways stayed for 2 weeks, becoming a part of the extended Hayes York family during that time. They shared stories of Emily, allowing Preston to remember the good times rather than just the tragic end. Katherine listened and learned about the woman who had first claimed her husband's heart, finding not jealousy, but a deep gratitude that Preston had been loved so well before tragedy struck. When it came time for the Callaways to return to Texas, promises were made to write regularly and visit when possible. Martha placed her hands on Catherine's belly in blessing before they left. "Our grandchild in spirit, if not in blood," she said warmly. "Emily would be so happy to know Preston found you." After their departure, Katherine noticed a profound change in Preston. It was as if a weight he had carried for years had finally been lifted, allowing him to embrace their future without the shadows of the past darkening his joy. June brought scorching heat that made Catherine's final months of pregnancy especially challenging. Preston insisted on moving their bed nearer to the window to catch any evening breeze and spent hours constructing a special rocking chair that would ease her discomfort. "The baby will love being rocked in this," she observed as she tested the finished chair, running her hands over the smooth wood. "First of many," Preston replied with a smile that made her heart skip. "If you're willing." Katherine returned his smile. "I think a house full of York children sounds perfect." July arrived, and with it, the signs that their child would soon make an appearance. Dr. Miller had warned that first babies often came late, but on the evening of July 10th, Katherine felt the first pains while helping Preston clear the supper dishes. "It's time," she said calmly, though her heart was racing. "The baby is coming." Preston's composure deserted him entirely. He nearly dropped the plates he was holding, set them down with shaking hands, then rushed to help Katherine to their bed before racing to the main house to fetch her father and send for the doctor and midwife. What followed were 18 hours of labor that tested Katherine's strength to its limits. Preston remained by her side throughout, wiping her brow, supporting her through contractions, and murmuring words of encouragement and love. "You're the strongest person I've ever known," he told her as dawn broke and the labor intensified. "You can do this, Katherine, you and our child together." Finally, as morning sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to Preston's eyes. "A girl," the midwife announced, cleaning the infant quickly before placing her in Katherine's arms. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Katherine gazed down at the tiny face, overwhelmed by a love so powerful it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Preston sat beside them on the bed, one arm around Katherine and one hand gently touching his daughter's dark hair. "She's perfect," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Absolutely perfect." They named her Emily Rose York, honoring both Preston's past and their present. When they shared the name with the family, Joseph Hayes nodded approval, understanding the significance. "A fine name for a fine girl," he said, cradling his first grandchild with practiced ease. "She'll grow up knowing she was named for someone special." The years that followed brought changes to the Hayes ranch. Joseph eventually stepped back from day-to-day operations, turning more responsibility over to Preston and Katherine's brothers. The ranch expanded, its reputation for quality cattle and horses spreading throughout the territory. Emily grew into a spirited child with her father's dark hair and her mother's blue eyes. She was joined by a brother, Joseph Preston, 2 years later, and then by twins, Sarah and Samuel, 2 years after that. Katherine found motherhood exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. She chronicled their family's journey in the journal Preston had given her that first Christmas, filling it with observations about their children, sketches of daily life, and reflections on the twists and turns of her own remarkable path. Preston proved to be a devoted father, as patient and gentle with his children, as he was competent and respected in his work. He taught Emily to ride before she could properly walk, much to Katherine's mingled amusement and concern. He read to the children every evening, doing different voices for each character, until they collapsed in giggles. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston surprised Katherine by taking her back to the creek where he had proposed. The children were left in the capable care of their grandfather and uncles for the day, allowing the couple a rare opportunity to be alone together. They rode out early, Preston carrying a picnic basket similar to the one from that momentous evening a decade earlier. When they reached the spot, now marked by a small stone bench Preston had built years before, Katherine was touched to find wildflowers arranged in a circle, just as they had been the first time. "Some things shouldn't change," Preston said, helping her dismount with the same courtly care he had always shown her. They spent the day reminiscing, laughing about the challenges of raising 4 children and planning for the future. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the creek, Preston took Catherine's hands in his, just as he had done 10 years before. "These have been the happiest years of my life," he told her, his eyes reflecting the same love she had seen in them the day they met. "You gave me a second chance at life, Catherine, a home, a family, a purpose." "We gave each other those things," she corrected gently, "and we've built something beautiful together." Preston reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I had something made for you," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice that reminded Catherine of their courtship days. Inside the pouch was a necklace, a delicate silver chain holding a pendant with 5 stones. The largest, in the center, was the deep blue of the creek stone in her engagement ring. Surrounding it were 4 smaller stones, each a different color. "The blue is you and me," Preston explained, his finger touching the central stone. "The others are our children, Emily's green, Joseph's amber, Sarah's rose quartz, and Samuel's tiger's eye." "Our family," Catherine whispered, deeply moved. "Oh, Preston, it's beautiful." He fastened it around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin, just like its wearer. As twilight deepened around them, they held each other close, secure in the knowledge that what they had built together would endure. From that desperate day in the barn, when Outlaws had cornered her, and a cowboy had kicked the door in and fired first, to this peaceful moment by the creek, their story had been one of courage, resilience, and above all, love. "We should get back," Catherine said eventually, though reluctant to end their special day. "You know Emily will have convinced her grandfather to let her wait up for us." Preston smiled, helping Catherine to her feet. "She's stubborn like her mother." "And brave like her father," Catherine added, reaching up to touch his face in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over their years together. As they rode home side by side in the gathering darkness, Catherine thought about the unexpected turns her life had taken, how the most terrifying day of her existence had led to her greatest happiness, how a stranger's courage had transformed into a husband's devotion, how their love had created not just a family, but a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. The lights of the ranch appeared in the distance, warm and welcoming. Catherine glanced at Preston, finding him already looking at her with that expression that still made her heart race after all these years. "Race you home?" she challenged with a grin, knowing full well they were both too responsible to gallop in the dark. Preston laughed, the sound rich and free in the night air. "No need to race," he replied. "Home is wherever you are, Katherine York, and I'm in no hurry for this journey to end." They continued at their steady pace, side by side, heading toward the lights and the future they would face together, just as they had faced everything else since that fateful day when danger had brought them together and love had kept them that way.